If you're new to our channel, we'd love to have you join our little community. Just hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications. We promise it will be worth your while.
When it was in place, the beautician gave a French manicure to his fingernails that matched the coloring of his toenails. The beautician then said goodbye to Eric and the technician before she mentioned that she would be seeing Eric again. Eric did not pay much attention to her words, as he was obsessed by how feminine every piece of his body that he could see looked. The technician then had Eric lay down on the examination table after his nail polish had finished drying. The technician painted Eric's throat prosthetic to make it match his skin tone before she sat him down and asked, "What would you like for lunch?" "Lunch?" Eric asked, not feeling the slightest bit hungry. "Yes, it's 2 o'clock. "Really?" Eric replied as he realized that he had lost all conception of time. "Yes. Now what will it be?" "Well, what are my options? We want you to lose some weight, so you have 2 choices, salad or yogurt." "I'm not really a salad person," Eric replied. "Well, that will have to change, but right now I'll order you a yogurt." "1 yogurt?" Eric asked in an almost childish tone that embarrassed him. "A girl's got to starve herself to stay thin. Beauty has a price, dear." Eric nodded, unhappy about his situation, but well aware that there was little he could do to change it at the moment. The technician called in an order for him as he waited for the paint on his neck prosthesis to dry. A staff member brought Eric a container of yogurt and a spoon. Eric ate the yogurt without incident as the technician watched his throat prosthesis as he swallowed. When he finished the yogurt, he asked the girl, "What's so interesting?" "I was just making you swallow the yogurt." "Why?" Eric asked as a feeling of uneasiness came over him. "Well, that device constricting your vocal cords and voice box interferes with your swallowing. You can swallow soft foods, like yogurt, eggs, and oatmeal, but with harder foods, you're going to have to take small bites. Just cut your food up the way you would for a small child, and you'll be good to go." "Are you serious?" Eric asked in a high tone that bothered his ears. "Very serious, and it's all for the best." "How do you figure?" Eric asked in the deepest voice he found that he could muster. The girl replied, "Well, taking smaller bites will result in your stomach telling you that you're full faster. You will eat less, and you will lose weight until your body reaches a plateau once it has become used to the decreased food intake." Eric glared at the girl as he replied, "I'm 5'8" and only weigh 120 pounds. How much weight do I have to spare?" "A girl can always stand to lose 10 to 20 pounds, the girl replied with a smile before she opened the door and said, "It's time for your next treatment." Eric shook his head as he feared what the loss of weight would do to his body. He looked at her and responded, "Can't I at least have something to cover this up?" as he pointed at his body. "Oh, I'm sorry," the girl replied before she provided him with a hospital gown. Eric slipped it on and walked down the hallway with her before she brought him into a room where 2 other clients were undergoing treatments. Eric looked at the 2 feminized men who were having their hair worked on. The first man was having his hair dyed, while the other was having the final extensions added to his hair. Eric was told to wait his turn, and he sat down on a chair and waited for the stylist to call him over. When she did, Eric got to his feet and walked over to her. There was not a mirror in the room to his dismay as he sat down at the stylist's station. Eric was hoping to at least get a glimpse of himself. He could see how convincingly feminine the other men were, and was anxious to see if he was as unambiguously feminine too. The stylist worked on Eric's hair as he wondered how he looked at that moment. He thought about what awaited him back home too. He feared that while he might look young enough to be in high school, he would be such an outsider that Bianca's plan would not work. He knew that she would be watching him as he walked the hallways of her school. He wondered what she would do if she thought he was intentionally failing to bond with the other girls. The stylist spent hours on his extensions before his hair was dyed. Eric hated the smell of the dye. He had always hated the smell from when he was young, when his mother would dye her hair in her eternal quest to keep looking young for the string of boyfriends she had after his father's death. When the stylist was finished dyeing his hair, Eric could see from the strands of hair that fell along the side of his face that she had dyed it strawberry blonde. He shook his head and knew that Bianca had to have had a hand in the color selection, Bianca always loved the hair color, but she felt that she could not pull off the hair color given the perpetually tanned skin she inherited from her Italian grandmother. The hair color, however, went well with Eric's light skin tone. I hope she's jealous when she sees me, Eric thought for a second, before he chuckled to himself as he realized the ridiculous nature of his thought. Eric's smile faded as he was told to stand up by a clinic employee. The staff member directed Eric to his next destination. Eric got to his feet and followed the man's directions. He turned a corner and walked into a room and saw the beautician waiting for him. "Oh, there's my new canvas," she said with a smile. Eric forced a grin to his face as he walked towards her with his head down. The woman sat Eric down on a chair and began to thin out his eyebrows. The plucking did not hurt him all that much before she turned her attention to putting on his makeup. Now, Eric listened to the woman as she explained the purpose of the various cosmetics she was applying to his face. She was careful to give him makeup tips and explained that he would be undergoing makeup training during his stay at the clinic. Eric responded to her praise for his appearance with polite thankfulness. The praise only made him wonder more and more about what he looked like. Eric then asked, "Can I get a mirror?" "A mirror?" The woman replied with a laugh before she said, "Soon enough. I'm not the one that gives our new creations a mirror to see themselves. That's left to our personal stylists." "When will I be seeing them?" "Right about now," she responded. Eric nodded as he looked up at the woman before he saw the door open. A young woman walked through the door and looked Eric over from head to toe as he sat in the beautician's chair. She nodded to herself and said, "I've got just the style in mind for you, young lady." Eric blushed while he got to his feet to follow her out the door. As he did so, he asked, "Could you please not call me young lady?" "What else would I call you then?" "How about Eric?" "Eric? That's no name for a pretty young girl." "Well, I'm not a pretty young girl." "Well, if you say so, but I sure won't be calling you Eric, Jasmine." "Jasmine?" "Yes, that's the name we have that was selected for you." "By who?" Eric said, as he voiced reached its highest pitch and irritated his ears as well as the personal stylist. "Your intake sheet doesn't say if it was by you or your companion." "You mean my wife?" "I don't think a woman your age can legally marry." "I'm 27 years old." "Not anymore, dear. You're definitely a minor, at least under this state's laws." "Oh, come on, we're not outside. Could you at least treat me like the man I am in here?" The girl laughed as she looked over Eric's body. She pointed at him and said, "What man is that? The man that has no body hair, the man that has such girlish twig legs, the man that has nothing pushing his hospital gown away from his body beneath his waist, the man that has something pushing his hospital gown away from above his waist, the man who—" "Okay, I get it." "Good girl," the girl responded as she pushed open a door and said, "Let's get you started." Eric watched as the girl went through the racks of clothes for ones his size and said, "Since you're a teenager, we're going to have to dress you properly." "Okay," Eric replied slowly. "That means no stockings or petticoats or any other of those childish sissy fantasies you may have." "I'm not a sissy." "Of course not. You're a teenage girl and that's what you're going to dress like." "Great," Eric replied. The girl noticed his sarcasm and said, "Well, if you insist, we could get you some Lolita fashion. I think you'd stick out like a sore thumb, though." "No, that won't be necessary." Eric rushed to respond as he thought about the style of dress he was so enamored with during a trip to Japan a few years earlier. "Good, because I totally get a girly girl vibe from you, and I'd rather you fit in when you rock that look." "How old are you?" Eric asked. The girl smiled and said, "I'm 22. So I'm not that far removed from standing in your shoes." Eric stared at the girl for a second before he asked, "Are you a former patient?" "Well, first off, we don't call our guests patients. We call them clients as we're not actually operating on them. Secondly, you wish you could look as good as me, babe. I'm all natural." Eric nodded, feeling slightly relieved that the picture of femininity in front of him dressed in shorts, pantyhose, and 4-inch platform high heels that so aroused him was not a man. The girl then produced a slip-on gray high-waisted bandage skirt, a layered white jersey tank top with a scoop neck, and 3-inch heeled silver fabric, peep-toe pumps. She smiled as she said, "This should get you started on the road to being the girl you've always wanted to be." "I never wanted to be a girl." "I think it's time to drop the act, sister," the girl retorted as she handed him a white bra and a pair of gray tights and told him to put them on. Eric sighed as he took them from her. After removing his hospital dress, he first tried to put on the bra. He had seen girls do it a number of times before and figured that there was no real mystery to putting it on. He struggled to hook it behind his back, while the girl smiled at his nude, feminized body that he no longer felt the urge to cover himself up, as he knew that the exposed private parts were not really his anyway. The stylist continued to smile, as she had seen countless men come through and struggle with their bras and never ask for help. She liked watching Eric struggle as his pride prevented him from asking the young girl for help dressing himself. After 10 minutes, Eric gave up and said, "You know what? I've decided to put on the pantyhose first." "Okay, but those are tights, not pantyhose." "Is that a distinction without a difference?" "Not amongst girls, it isn't." Eric shrugged and tried to put his feet into the tights, but the personal stylist stopped him. "What's the matter?" Eric asked. "You're going to put a run into them that way." "Well, what do I have to do?" "You have to roll them down to the bottom." "Like this," Eric said as he slowly rolled the tights down. "Like that," the girl said as she watched Eric. As he finished rolling them, she said, "Now take a seat over here and put your toes to the seam of each foot." Eric nodded and sat down on a stool in the room. He followed the personal stylist's direction and then slowly unrolled the tights up his leg as she instructed. Eric felt himself becoming aroused as the silky feeling of the tights ascended his legs. He was happy that his vagina form was keeping the young girl from noticing the pleasure he was taking in putting them on. As he finished pulling the tights up his legs, the girl handed Eric the bra back. Eric sighed and blushed as he asked, "Do you have any tips for this?" The girl nodded and instructed Eric how to hook the bra behind his back. Eric struggled to put her advice into practice, but after a few minutes, he found that he was able to. Eric then slipped the tank top overhead and stepped into the constricting skirt before he slid his feet into the heels. The girl smiled at Eric as she took him by the hand and led him out of the room. Eric felt uneasy walking in the heels with the tight stride constricting skirt, but he felt slightly at ease because the personal stylist was dictating a slow pace as she guided him into a room that was mirrored on all four sides. Eric's jaw dropped as he moved his head around and saw his feminized body from all four sides. He turned and saw the personal stylist smile as she went close to the door as she said, "I'm going to give you a moment to collect yourself, dear." Eric watched the door close and saw that it had a mirror on the back of it too. Eric moved towards a corner and looked at how feminine his figure was. Everything about his appearance screamed girly girl, as the personal stylist had indicated. Eric examined his long strawberry blonde-colored hair that was parted in the middle before he looked at his feminine face. There was nothing masculine about it. There was not a trace of the beard stubble he was used to sporting. There was nothing left of his eyebrows, but thin arches. The pink glossy lips seemed to be inviting a kiss he could never place on them. There were few traces of the face that he had been used to seeing in the mirror. The reshaping of his chin, however, had certainly feminized his face, as had the nose prosthesis. Eric felt that his nose was too large for a girl, but he knew he could not expect otherwise without undergoing surgery. Still, the shape of the nose was feminine. He felt a bit self-conscious about it, though, wondering if it was a bit bulbous. "I'm sure the other girls will tease me for this," Eric thought to himself, before he realized that he thought of himself as a girl. Eric shook his head, trying to disabuse himself of that notion. As he stared at the floor, he repeated to himself, "No matter how much you may look like you're a girl, you're a guy. Remember that." Eric took a deep breath and looked back into the mirror. He saw only a strange girl staring back at him. As Eric examined her face, he knew that she was definitely a teenager. "I can't even buy a drink with this face," Eric muttered before he went back gazing at his feminine reflection. After a few minutes, The personal stylist knocked on the door and opened it. She smiled and asked, "How do you like the vanity room?" Eric stared at her and asked, "Is this real?" "Not that." She smirked as she walked towards him and pinched his arm. Eric cringed as she replied, "Does it feel real?" Eric nodded as he stared back at the young girl's face in the mirror. Eric's stupor ended when the stylist said, "Okay, stop admiring yourself, girlie. It's time to get you some dinner and then I'm going to put you through your motions." "My what?" "Your motions, training, etc. I'm going to be the one who trains you over the next 2 weeks to be the type of girl who fits seamlessly with all the other teen girls you're going to be calling classmates soon enough." "You know about that?" Eric asked, as he wondered what other information Bianca had given the clinic. "We know what we need to do to make sure that when you leave this place, no one will think that you're anything other than a regular teenage girl unless they know the truth." Eric nodded and walked beside his personal trainer as she led him towards the cafeteria for dinner. Eric listened to her instructions as she told him to let the skirt constrict his stride and to carefully take each step. She smiled at his occasional stumbles and said, "Don't worry, it gets easier with practice." Eric nodded in response and hoped that she was right. When he got to the cafeteria, he was provided with a salad. Although he wanted to eat something with protein, he knew that his objections to the salad would get him nowhere. Eric ate beside the personal stylist in the cafeteria. She gave him advice regarding how he ate and how he sat. Eric was careful to observe her advice, as he did not want anyone looking up his skirt. While Eric felt uncomfortable wearing such clothing, it was nothing in comparison to the feeling he got when he swallowed. Eric realized the technician was right. He found that he had to cut up his salad into very small bits before he chewed it. Despite feeling hungry when he entered the cafeteria, Eric only ate half his salad before he felt full. With his dinner finished, the personal stylist took Eric to the room he would be staying in during his time at the clinic. Eric looked around the room that was decorated with heart-shaped items. The word princess was printed above the bed that was covered with a pink bedspread on it. Eric felt that the room was too girlish. He stuck out his tongue as he looked at his accommodations, prompting the personal stylist to admonish him. "That's not ladylike. You're going to a proper private school, not a trashy public school, where that kind of white trash behavior is tolerated." Eric nodded at her, knowing that his wife would probably admonish her student if she stuck out her tongue in disgust in her presence. The personal stylist felt that she had made her point when she picked up a 17 magazine and pointed to a stack of magazines as she said, "Take a look at these. I expect you to read each and every one of them while you're here. You're going to start with this one, and I'm going to quiz on teen culture each day to make sure you're doing your reading." "Okay," Eric replied as he looked at the television and wondered if there was a game on. The personal stylist smiled at Eric and said, "And don't waste your time watching television. The only channels you get in this room are MTV, MTV2, and the CW. Watching it will do you some good, but I don't want you to get jealous about other girls' super sweet 16s because you're not going to get one." Eric cursed under his breath as he realized that he had no male outlet in that room. He looked at the personal stylist and nodded to her before she left the room. Eric climbed into the bed and turned on the television to confirm what he had been told. When he found out that she had not been lying to him, he took to reading the 17 magazine she had provided him. The celebrity gossip in its pages bored him, but he made sure to memorize each detail before he looked at the other magazines in the pile that was left for him. Eric looked at each title with a feeling of sickness growing in his stomach. Glamour, Teen Vogue, Allure. God, why couldn't she have at least let me be a tomboy? Eric thought to himself as he rubbed his face. Eric cringed as he looked at the makeup that had rubbed off on his hands. Eric walked into the bathroom that was part of his accommodations and washed his hands. He saw makeup remover on the sink top and began to apply it to his face as he had seen Bianca do to hers each day before bed. When he was satisfied that it was off, Eric walked back into the bedroom section of his room and looked for a change of clothes. He found a few pairs of girls' pajamas, and he put on the least girly pair he was provided with, which consisted of a neon pink V-neck t-shirt and leopard pants with a pink belted waist. After Eric dressed in his pajamas, he headed to the bathroom again. He went to lift the seat on the toilet, but he found that it would not budge. He cursed himself for a moment before he realized that there was a reason it could not be pulled up. Eric sighed as he sat down and went to the bathroom, feeling more feminine than he had since he left the mirrored room. Eric wiped himself dry as Bianca had done in his presence before. Eric then walked over to his bed and slipped under the covers. He read another magazine with the light on before he turned it off and turned in for the night. Eric spent the next 2 weeks going through a feminine boot camp. He was put through the rigors of learning to walk in heels, sit like a woman, use his hands like a woman, and increase his voice inflection like a woman as well. The clinic focused on every detail to try to get Eric to conduct himself unambiguously, like a teenage girl. Eric feared that the training would affect him even after his prosthetics were removed, and he was a man again. But he knew that those fears were premature at best. Eric found that the training took up most of his days, and he had to laugh at the basic training like walking with a book on his head to keep his straight and his chin up. It all felt ridiculous to him, but he worked on it as hard as he could for fear of Bianca finding out that he was not trying his best. In addition to training him to act like a woman, Eric found that his personal stylist was actually going to quiz him on popular culture. Every day he had to read several entertainment style and women's magazines, and he was tested for his retention of it each day. His personal stylist would hold up pictures of various celebrities, and he was required to repeat the lines he was told were his opinions of each of them. As his personal stylist picked up a picture of Justin Bieber, Eric said, "That's Justin. He's so hot. I'm going to be Mrs. Bieber. He can do so much better than that skank Selena." As his personal stylist nodded, she picked up a picture of Taylor Lautner, prompting Eric to say, "He's so cute in that body, OMG. He's so much hotter than Count Fagula." Satisfied with his answer, the stylist continued with other celebrities' pictures. Eric found that he was frequently praising the male celebrities, while he was finding the slightest faults with female celebrities to tear them down. Eric did not understand why he was being trained that way, but he figured that there had to be a reason. Eric spent his time alone in his room getting caught up on his reading, and Teen Mom and various other reality shows on MTV. While Eric felt that everything he was learning was useless information, he felt better about learning it, since he knew it would make it easier for him to fit in at school.